The 1970s are often remembered as a carefree, colorful decade, but beneath the nostalgia was a world filled with products, advertisements, and everyday habits that would be considered dangerously unsafe today. From toxic toys and misleading commercials to cars without seatbelts and cigarettes promoted as healthy. The 70s were a very different time when safety rules were minimal and regulation was rare. In this video, we explore the shocking products that disappeared forever, the advertisements that would never be allowed on TV today, and the trends that quietly vanished once people realized the risks. Many of these items were found in nearly every home, used by children, and advertised openly without warning labels or disclaimers. You'll discover how lawn darts became a family game, why smoking was allowed almost everywhere, how household chemicals were sold without instructions, and how playgrounds were built with concrete, metal, and zero protection. These forgotten dangers didn't just vanish. They helped shape the safety laws and regulations we rely on today. If you grew up in the 1970s, this video will bring back surprising memories. If you didn't, you may be shocked that any of this was ever considered normal. The 1970s were a wild west for consumer goods, where many everyday products reached the shelves with little to no safety testing by modern standards. Before the widespread implementation of rigorous oversight, the philosophy was often buyer beware, leaving families to navigate a marketplace filled with hidden dangers. The concept of extensive, pre-market safety trials was not the norm, and as a result, countless items that are now heavily regulated or banned outright were common household staples. This lack of scrutiny meant that the long-term health and safety consequences of using a product were often discovered only after numerous accidents or injuries had already occurred. It was a time when the burden of safety fell almost entirely on the consumer, who was often unaware of the risks lurking in their shopping carts and cupboards. This era of minimal regulation created a landscape where manufacturers could market products based on appeal and function, with safety being a distant, secondary concern, if it was a concern at all. For children of the 1970s, playtime was an adventure fraught with perils that would make a modern parent shudder. Children's toys frequently featured sharp metal edges, small, detachable parts that posed serious choking hazards, and were often coated in lead-based paint, which we now know is highly toxic. Warning labels were a rarity, and the idea of age-appropriate design was in its infancy. A toy's primary purpose was to be fun, not necessarily safe. As a result, it wasn't uncommon for a child's plaything to be capable of causing cuts, bruises, or worse. The colorful, appealing exteriors of these toys often concealed dangers that were simply accepted as a part of growing up. This unregulated environment meant that toy chests across the country were filled with items that would be immediately recalled from the market today, highlighting just how much our standards for child safety have evolved over the decades. Perhaps no product better represents the hazardous nature of 1970s family fun than lawn darts. Menacingly nicknamed jarts, these heavy metal-tipped projectiles were marketed as a thrilling backyard game for all ages, a sort of outdoor version of horseshoes. Families would gather on sunny afternoons to hurl these mini-spears across the lawn, aiming for plastic rings on the ground. Despite their obvious potential for harm, they were sold in toy stores and department stores nationwide. The inevitable, tragic result was a string of serious injuries and, devastatingly, several child deaths when the darts missed their targets and struck people instead. It took years of public outcry and documented accidents before these dangerous projectiles were finally banned from sale, serving as a chilling reminder of a time when a product's potential for fun could overshadow its capacity for fatal harm. The advertising landscape of the 1970s was a world away from the one we know today, especially when it came to cigarettes. Tobacco companies openly promoted their products with messaging that would be unthinkable now. Cigarette advertisements were a common sight during daytime television, often featuring rugged, masculine figures or elegant, sophisticated women to associate smoking with health, success, and glamour. Some ads went so far as to make outright health claims, suggesting certain brands were milder or less irritating to the throat, creating a false sense of safety. These commercials normalized smoking as a desirable, everyday activity, embedding it deeply into the cultural fabric. The aggressive marketing tactics ensured that cigarettes were seen not as a health risk, but as an aspirational lifestyle choice, a perception that would take decades of public health campaigns to dismantle. The permissiveness surrounding smoking extended far beyond advertising and into nearly every corner of public and private life. In the 1970s, smoking was allowed almost everywhere, with no smoking sections being the rare exception, not the rule. People lit up on airplanes, in office buildings, in restaurants, and even in hospitals. It was not uncommon to see doctors smoking in their offices or patients smoking in their hospital beds. Shockingly, the smoke-filled haze even permeated spaces like school staff rooms and, in some cases, maternity wards. This widespread acceptance meant that non-smokers, including children, were constantly exposed to secondhand smoke, a concept whose dangers were not yet fully understood or acknowledged by the general public. The world was, in essence, one giant smoking section. Beneath the kitchen sink of a typical 1970s home was an arsenal of household cleaners, containing highly toxic chemicals, sold with minimal safety instructions or warnings. Products with powerful solvents, acids, and corrosive agents were packaged in containers that were often not childproof, and the labels rarely detailed the potential dangers of inhalation, skin contact, or accidental ingestion. Instructions were often limited to basic usage directions, without mentioning the need for ventilation or protective gear like gloves. This lack of information left consumers dangerously unaware of the risks they were taking while cleaning their homes. The cheerful packaging and advertisements belied the hazardous nature of these substances, contributing to countless accidental poisonings and chemical burns that could have been prevented with the clear warnings and safety features we expect today. One of the most insidious and pervasive dangers of the era was asbestos, a material once hailed as a miracle for its fire-resistant and insulating properties. It was widely used in the construction of homes, schools, and offices. Found in everything from ceiling tiles and floor coverings to insulation wrapped around pipes. But its reach didn't stop there. Asbestos was also incorporated into consumer goods, including appliances like hairdryers and toasters, and, alarmingly, even found its way into children's craft kits that contained asbestos-laced modeling clay. The microscopic fibers, when disturbed and inhaled, were later discovered to cause devastating lung diseases like mesothelioma and asbestosis. In the 1970s, however, this silent killer was an invisible part of the everyday environment, its lethal nature completely unknown to the millions of people living and working around it. The family car of the 1970s was a stark contrast to the safety-engineered vehicles of today. Basic features that we now take for granted were either optional luxuries or entirely non-existent. Most cars lacked airbags, and crumple zones designed to absorb impact in a crash were not a standard design principle. While front seatbelts were becoming more common, they were often simple lap belts, and rear seatbelts were frequently not installed at all. The heavy, rigid steel frames of these cars were thought to offer protection through sheer strength, but in reality, they transferred the full force of a collision directly to the occupants. Driving was an inherently more dangerous activity, and accidents that might be survivable today often had far more severe consequences due to this fundamental lack of protective engineering. The approach to child passenger safety in the 1970s was shockingly lax. The concept of a dedicated car seat was brand new and not widely adopted or mandated. It was a common sight to see children riding in cars completely unrestrained, often standing on the seats to look out the window, lying down in the rear window ledge, or sitting on a parent's lap in the front seat. In the event of a sudden stop or a crash, these children became vulnerable projectiles. The car seat of the era was often little more than a flimsy plastic booster seat with a toy steering wheel, designed to keep a child entertained and elevated rather than safe. This casual attitude toward in-car safety reflects a profound gap in understanding the physics of a crash and the immense risk it posed to the youngest, most fragile passengers. The pharmaceutical industry also operated under a different set of rules, heavily promoting prescription drugs directly to the public with cheerful and reassuring advertisements. These ads often downplayed or entirely omitted the serious side effects and potential risks associated with the medications. Drugs meant to treat anxiety, depression, and other conditions were marketed as simple, happy solutions to life's problems, featuring smiling actors and upbeat jingles. This created an environment where patients might pressure their doctors for a specific brand-name drug they saw on TV, without a full understanding of its health implications. The focus was on selling a lifestyle and a quick fix, often at the expense of informed patient consent and a realistic portrayal of the drug's effects. Alcohol advertisements of the 1970s frequently blurred the lines between adult beverages and youthful fun, using tactics that would be strictly forbidden today. Breweries and liquor companies often targeted young audiences with cartoon mascots, playful imagery, and sponsorship of events popular with teens and young adults. Commercials depicted drinking as a core part of fun, friendship, and adventure, creating a strong association between alcohol and a carefree, desirable lifestyle. These ads rarely, if ever, included messages about responsible drinking. The aggressive marketing to a younger demographic contributed to normalizing early alcohol consumption and set the stage for future regulations designed to protect youth from such targeted advertising. Every time a driver filled up their car in the 1970s, they were contributing to a massive, invisible environmental health crisis. Leaded gasoline. For decades, lead was added to gasoline to improve engine performance, and its use was considered completely normal. The exhaust from millions of cars released tons of toxic lead particles into the air, which then settled onto soil, water, and city streets, where it could be inhaled or ingested. The devastating neurological and developmental effects of lead poisoning, especially in children, were not yet widely publicized or understood. The air in cities was thick with this unseen poison, a daily reality that was accepted as just a part of modern life until scientific evidence forced a global phase out. The barrier between entertainment and advertising was incredibly thin on kids' television. Commercials were not just ads. They were direct appeals to children, encouraging them to pressure their parents into buying products. Using catchy songs, beloved cartoon characters, and exciting visuals, these ads for sugary cereals, toys, and fast food were designed to create an urgent sense of desire, a phenomenon known as the nag factor. The messaging was clear and effective. If you didn't have this toy or eat this cereal, you were missing out. This direct-to-child marketing strategy placed parents in a difficult position and exploited the vulnerability of young viewers, leading to later regulations that limited how advertisers could communicate with children. The 1970s offered children a level of unsupervised access to potentially dangerous items that is unimaginable today. Fireworks, including powerful firecrackers and bottle rockets, were often sold legally to minors from roadside stands. BB guns, which could cause serious eye injuries or other harm, were marketed as classic childhood toys. For the aspiring scientist, chemistry sets contained a fascinating, and sometimes hazardous, array of real chemicals, with instructions for experiments that could produce small explosions or toxic fumes. These items were sold with the assumption of responsible use, but with little to no adult supervision required. They put a significant amount of risk directly into the hands of children. Navigating the grocery store aisles was an exercise in guesswork, as food packaging rarely provided the detailed information we now rely on. Full ingredient lists were not always mandatory, and nutritional information like calorie counts, fat content, or sugar levels was virtually non-existent. Consumers had no easy way of knowing what was truly in their food, including the various artificial colors, flavors, and preservatives that were commonly used. This lack of transparency made it difficult for people with allergies or dietary restrictions to make safe choices and allowed food manufacturers to market highly processed, unhealthy products as wholesome family fare. The pursuit of beauty in the 1970s often involved a daily dose of harsh chemicals that are now banned or heavily restricted. Hair and beauty products, from hairspray to makeup, frequently contained ingredients like methylene chloride, formaldehyde, and various other volatile organic compounds. Aerosol cans, particularly for hairspray, were notorious for their powerful chemical clouds that filled poorly ventilated bathrooms. The long-term health risks associated with inhaling or absorbing these substances were not well publicized, and consumer safety was secondary to product performance. People unknowingly exposed themselves to a cocktail of potentially harmful chemicals in the name of achieving the era's popular hairstyles and cosmetic looks. The playgrounds of the 1970s were landscapes of unforgiving materials. The ground was often paved with concrete or asphalt, with no soft padding or wood chips to cushion a fall. The equipment itself was typically constructed from solid metal bars, heavy chains, and splintery wooden planks. Towering metal slides would become scorching hot in the summer sun. Merry-go-rounds spun at dizzying speeds with no governors, and seesaws were built to launch an unsuspecting child into the air. There was little to no consideration for safety design. The goal was to provide thrilling, physically challenging play. As a result, broken bones, concussions, and other serious injuries were simply seen as a routine part of childhood play. The concept of workplace safety was also far less developed, leading to significantly higher rates of on-the-job injuries and fatalities compared to today. Industries like construction, manufacturing, and mining were particularly dangerous, with minimal enforcement of safety regulations. Personal protective equipment, such as hard hats, safety glasses, and respirators, was not always required or provided. The prevailing attitude was often that accidents were an unavoidable part of the job. This lack of a strong safety culture meant that workers were routinely exposed to hazardous machinery, toxic substances, and unsafe conditions without the legal protections and oversight that are now standard. As public awareness grew and regulatory bodies gained strength, many of the once popular advertisements from the 1970s disappeared from the airwaves. Commercials were pulled due to misleading claims, such as those promoting cigarettes as healthy or diet pills as magical.